Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Destroying Doubts, where we address your questions and misconceptions about Islam. We have an exciting episode today where we're going to be discussing an interesting topic around morality and Islam. And this comes in light of conversations that are happening all around us with respect to Islam and people evaluating Islam from an outsider's standpoint as to whether or not Islam is ethical, whether or not its morality is compatible with the modern world, whether or not things like hudud punishments are considered harsh, the corporal punishments are considered harsh, or whether or not they fit within a modern framework. And so at the heart of the conversation is really the religious and the secular world and how that divide exists. And to shed light on this today, we have a special guest, Hamza Tzortzis, who is the founder of Sapience Institute. Sapience Institute aspires to elevate Islamic discourse through deeper intellectual engagement with foundational values of compassion, truth, and tolerance. Hamza is a writer, researcher, public speaker, and is currently completing his PhD in philosophy. Hamza, assalamu alaikum, thank you for joining us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah for the opportunity, my beloved brother. How are you?
I'm well, and it's good to have you here. We know you're on the other side of the world, so a bit of a time difference, but thank you for collaborating with us and just making this work. We appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah, anytime, always at your service.
Thank you very much. So you know what the topic is. I'm going to get straight into it and start with our first question. Let's start at the foundation. So what is ethics?
That's a good question. So usually when we try and define things, we go to dictionaries. So when we go to the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, ethics is defined as the philosophical study of morality, which basically means thinking about morality. And obviously the word ethics is commonly used interchangeably with morality. So with regards to the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, it's basically saying that ethics and morality is the study of morality, the study of how to act and how to be. And I quote, "It can in turn be divided in the general study of goodness, the general study of right action, applied ethics, meta ethics, which really relates to the source and nature of moral values. It can be applied to moral psychology and the metaphysics of moral responsibility." So from the perspective of the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, you can really unpack the definition by basically saying that ethics or morality deals with goodness, right action, practical application of ethical ideas, the psychology related to morality, as well as individual and group responsibility. So from this perspective, we can see that these ideas are quite timeless because we always ask the questions such as, what is good? How should one act? What is the source and nature of morality? What is evil? How should one not act? So these questions are related to the topic of ethics and morality, and they're timeless and they're cross-cultural.
Brilliant. So we often told that the society we're living in now is immoral or it's lacking of ethics. So can I ask you the question, are ethics dead?
Well, I'm not going to say ethics is dead, but there are some academics or thinkers from a sociological and scientific and even philosophical perspective that are arguing that maybe there is no ethics or morality, right? So let's consider the sociological perspective. There was a study done by Darrell Moellendorf and Heather Widdows, and it was called Global Ethics, A Short Reflection on Then and Now. And this was published in the Journal of Global Ethics. And what they did, they surveyed literature of global ethics from around 2005 to 2015. So it's 10 years. So they paint somewhat of a gloomy picture. So in the beginning, 2005, people are optimistic that, ethics can solve poverty or activism can solve global poverty, right? But after the financial crash, and many other different variables, there was less of an optimism. So in 2015, it created this kind of pessimism, and this pessimism can be argued that it was because of people's kind of disenheartenment with ethics, that, activism and being ethical can solve these issues, right? Also, you have another study or another journal is called The Myth of the Ethical Consumer. Do Ethics Matter in Purchase Behavior? And this was done by Marilyn Carrigan and Ahmed Attala. And basically, they seemingly, I'm not saying they have, but seemingly they basically debunked the myth of the ethical consumer. And they made a distinction between consumer sophistication, so in abstraction, understanding, ethical ideas with regards to being a good consumer, and actually their behavior, consumer behavior. And they basically kind of concluded that although people nowadays are more kind of sophisticated with regards to the moral principles and understanding moral principles concerning consumerism or consuming, the conclusion is that most consumers buy without taking into consideration any ethical concerns. So there is an argument from a sociological perspective, especially when it comes to consumerism and consuming and so on and so forth, that ethics doesn't play a huge role, and especially with regards to things like tackling global poverty. And from a scientific perspective, obviously you have, famous scientists that adopt scientism, which is the kind of absurd perspective that, the only way to render the truth about world and reality is through the scientific method. And, one such person is Alex Rosenberg. He wrote the book, The Atheist Guide to Reality. And he dedicates 2 chapters, chapter 5 and 6 of his book, arguing how science erases morality and ethics from reality, right? And because his foundational principle is a form of scientism, that the only way to form the truth about everything, including moral truths, is through the scientific method, which is absurd, of course. Yeah. Because he has that foundational principle, he basically says, well, science can't discover any moral facts or truths because they don't exist. Because if the only way to discover truth is through science, and science can't find under a microscope, if you like, any moral truth, then moral truths don't exist. So this leads to a conundrum that Rosenberg aptly formulates. He says, in a world where physics fixes all the facts, it's hard to see how there could be a room for moral facts, right? So to his credit, Rosenberg is consistent with his kind of absurd philosophy of scientism, yeah? Now, there's another interesting work by James Hunter and Paul Nedelinsky. It's called Science and the Good, The Tragic Quest for the Foundations of Morality. And they really get into the heart of the matter. And basically what they say is that, scientists, because of the success of the natural sciences, they try to now explain morality in terms of science. So they've stretched the scientific method. They've gone beyond its scope, if you like, because generally speaking, science is amoral, meaning it tells you, what is. It doesn't tell you what ought to be, right?
Yes.
And so in the end, what they basically say is that scientists have been motivated because of this success to potentially reject morality. Not all of them, some of them. Reject morality from the point of view as it's commonly understood, right? And they remove the moral meaning. When we talk about we have duties, or we ought to be in a certain way, we ought to act in this way, or we shouldn't act in another way, or we should be virtuous, that the meaning behind those terms and those narratives and perspectives is basically removed because of they are trying to see reality through the prism of science. So, and there's quite an apt quote here. So they're quite candid about this kind of scientific endeavor. And they say, yet many of its proponents claim much more of these types of findings than the science can justify. While some of this overreaching is due to honest mistakes or misunderstandings about what science has shown, some of it appears fraudulent, designed to capitalize on science's prestige and the public interest in practical moral advice. In the end, the new moral science still tells us nothing about what moral conclusions we should draw. So they basically argue that these scientists, not all of them, some of them who have de-scoped or they've gone beyond the scope of the scientific method, basically are coming across as somewhat morally fraudulent from a moral philosophical perspective, because this new moral science tells us nothing about what we should do and how we should act. So yes, there are some people in science that are saying that ethics is dead from that perspective, that there is a new type of morality, or you should remove, or the meaning, the traditional meaning behind these moral statements should change, or they're removed from the original meaning. So to answer the question, is ethics dead? No, I don't think so. It's the key ethical questions that we discussed earlier, or that we raised, are timeless and they're cross-cultural, right? Now think about this: more and more people are embracing Islam. Alhamdulillah, Islam is an ethical tradition, right? And more and more people, especially a post-COVID era, are thinking about, how should I live a good life? What is a good life? How should I be? What is my state of being? How should I relate with others? How should I act? How shouldn't I act, right? So these are really key questions. How should I behave? What is good? What is immoral conduct? These are timeless, key ethical questions. So therefore, ethics is central to our own existence, right? And I would even argue, obviously coming from a kind of academic background, ethics is a worthy topic to investigate, just for the sake of it, right? So I would say, notwithstanding philosophical or sociological considerations or scientific considerations like I just mentioned, practically ethics plays a huge role in people's lives, even if they're driven by personal benefit. And this is very interesting, because someone would argue, I don't believe in ethics, I'm just going to do whatever I like, what's good for me. Well, what's very interesting, that could be formulated into an ethical normative theory, which is called ethical egoism, right? Which is the kind of idea that, if you do what's best for yourself, that is actually morally good. So from that perspective, it's like, it's an ethical position itself. And that's something that, they can't run away from. Even if they claim that they're not ethical, they're just going to be selfish, or they're just going to refer to their own personal whims and desires and what's good for them, then at the end of the day, that's also a normative, ethical view as well.
Okay, interesting. So can we then ask, you were mentioning people coming to Islam and embracing Islam, and people asking these questions around ethics. So is Islam ethical?
100% Islam is ethical. People who say that Islam is not ethical have not probably read the Quran or engaged with any even basic study of the statements of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Islam has an amazing moral and legal philosophy, and we're going to hopefully unpack that a little bit later. But take, one scholar, for example, take Abdurrahman Habannaka. Yeah? He provided an in-depth study of akhlaq in Islam in his Al-Akhlaq Al-Islamiyya. And, as a religion, he basically says that Islam has rules, or ahkam. And he subdivides these rules into like 8 categories. So one category is the rules of theology, the ahkam of theology. The second one is the rules of worship. The third one is the rules of economic transactions. The fourth one is the rules of social relations. The fifth one is the rules of individual conduct. Then the sixth one is the rules of regulating contracts. The seventh one is the rules of ethics, the ahkam of akhlaq. Then you have the rules of etiquette, the ahkam of adab, yeah? So he says there are these kind of 8 categories. Now, what's very interesting, he has a closer look at these categories. And he says they are all reducible to akhlaq, or all reducible to ethics or ethical principles. And this is an interesting work. So for example, take the rules of worship. So we have ahkam concerning ibadah, concerning how do we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he breaks it down to an ethical principle, that it is based on the ethical principle, or the logic, the underlying logic of these ahkam is based on thanking those who help you, which is very interesting. So when a person helps you, you should be grateful to them. Because if you look at Kitab, Surah Al-Fatiha, the mother of the book, which summarizes the whole of the Quran, Allah is very clear when he says, all perfect and grateful, all perfect praise, extensive praise and utmost gratitude belong to the Lord of everything that exists. Allah is summarizing the relationship between the servant and the master. Allah is the Lord, we are the master, and Allah is saying that all perfect or extensive praise and utmost gratitude belong to the Lord of everything that exists. And we know extensive praise and ultimate gratitude are forms of worship. And that is like, if you want to think about it, that's like the logical principle or the ethical principle behind worship. Because fundamentally, our metaphysics, our worldview is that we are utterly dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are totally dependent on Him. Everything that happens is because of his irada and qudra, his will and his power, right? We know that, Allah assists us and helps us and sustains us and maintains us and so on and so forth. All of this is telling us, or should evoke within us, that we should be ultimately grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we should extensively praise him. Why should we extensively praise him? We should praise him by virtue of who he is. He is the Lord of the heavens and earth. Fine, he's giving us blessings which we should be grateful for, but we should extensively praise him because of who he is. He is the Lord. He is Ar-Rahman, the intensely merciful, Al-Wadud, the loving. He is Al-Hakim, the wise. He is Al-Bar, the greatest benefactor, the source of all goodness. And his names and attributes are perfect, transcendent, and to the highest degree possible. So if we are compelled to praise contingent things like a sports star or a singer or a poet, even though their attributes don't directly benefit us in any way, and even though their attributes are limited and flawed, but we are compelled naturally to praise them, then what about praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's the perfect being, whose names and attributes are to the highest degree possible and transcendent and maximally perfect? Allahu Akbar, right? Allah is great, right? Indeed, yeah. So there's like the kind of foundational ethical principle behind worship. Then he also says, what about the rules of economic transactions? Now, what he argues is these are based on the ethical principle of accepting the truth. This is very interesting because if you buy a product for a fixed price, then the seller cannot try and take double the price, right? Because the truth is that you and him have agreed the fixed price already. So if the seller denies this, he'll be rejecting the truth. So behind even economic transactions is akhlaq, is an ethical principle, and these are timeless principles. So, if I want to sell you my phone, I say, bro, I'm going to sell you my phone for $50, right? Okay, let's agree, and you have a handshake and you sign a deal, whatever, right? And then after you say, no, I'm going to sell it for 100. Well, that's not the economic transactions are not going to happen. They're not going to be fruitful. They're not going to, it's not going to facilitate, economic progress within a particular society if you're going to basically reject truth. So from Habannaka's discussion on ethics, it demonstrates very clearly, bro, that the death of ethics thesis is incorrect, especially from an Islamic perspective. And it also shows how important ethical principles are in our religious life, in the ahkam, in the rules, all the 8 categories that he mentions. And also it shows that Islam is extremely ethical. And we have lots of examples for this. Now, we could spend all night and day talking about the amazing ethics of Islam and unpacking them, but let's just mention some examples. Take, for example, the golden rule, right? Some people say Islam doesn't have the golden rule. You don't love for others what you love for yourself. Again, this is totally false. There are various ahadith, various traditions from the Prophet ﷺ that indicate this very clearly. The famous one is the 13th hadith in the Arba'een, in the 40 hadith of An-Nawawi, when the Prophet ﷺ says, none of you will truly believe, will have full complete faith unless he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Now, An-Nawawi explains that this also includes humanity, right? He says this is insaniya as well. From what perspective? From the perspective that you want goodness and guidance for them. So you need to be committed to people's well-being. You need to love for others what you love for yourself from the perspective of goodness and guidance. Yeah, and this view is the view of Al-Ghazali as well, the 10th century theologian, 11th century theologian and polymath, the proof of Islam. Right? He actually connects this whole discussion of the kind of golden rule with Allah's name Al-Wadud, that He is the loving. Right? And obviously, that as human beings, as Muslims, we should be human-centric manifestations of Allah's names and attributes. So what does that mean? That means if Allah is loving, we should be as loving as possible and be committed to people's well-being and goodness from a human perspective. If Allah is mutakabbir, He is the majestically proud, then we should be humble, right? So it's not always the case that you internalize a name and attribute as a mirror. It's also as you have to understand it in the context of your contingency and your humanity, right? So, but the point is, he links it to Allah's love, right? Also, you have, I think he was a Maliki jurist or Shafi'i, I'm not too sure, but you have Ibn Daqiq, right? He had similar writings concerning that this is about human beings. And you have other traditions, I believe, in Musnad Ahmad and so on and so forth. Also, you have another hadith that doesn't mention akhihi, your brother. It mentions linnas. In Arabic, linnas, for people, for humanity. It says love for humanity, what you love for yourself. And this hadith is narrated by Bukhari, but it is in Tarikh al-Kabir. And this has been made authentic by Dhahabi, for example, and others. So we have the golden rule: be committed to people's well-being, love for others what you love for yourself. You should be committed to the well-being from the perspective of you want goodness for them and guidance for them. Also, in general, how do we see Allah's commands? For example, in chapter 16, verse 9, Allah says, Allah commands justice, doing good, and generosity towards relatives, and He forbids what is shameful, blameworthy, and oppressive. He teaches you so that you may take heed. Also in chapter 7, verse 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, say, Allah does not command disgraceful deeds. How can you say about Allah things that you do not know to be true? And we have many other things like justice, the famous ayah in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 135. O you who believe, uphold justice and bear witness to Allah, even if it's against yourselves, your parents, or your close relatives, whether the person is rich or poor, Allah can best take care of both. Refrain from following your desire so that you can act justly. If you distort and neglect justice, Allah is fully aware of what you do. Also, what about compassion? Allah says in chapter 90, verse 17, and be one of those who believe and urge one another to steadfastness and compassion. What about honoring parents? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many places in the Quran, but in this instance, chapter 31:14 says, we have commanded people to be good to their parents. Their mothers carried them with strain upon strain, and it takes 2 years to wean them. Give thanks to me and to your parents, and all will return to me. How about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam concerning mercy, rahmah? This is narrated by Abu Dawood and Tirmidhi, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the merciful one shows mercy to those who themselves are merciful to others. Show mercy to whatever is on earth, then He who is in the heavens will show mercy to you. But, and I'll use one more. There's so many, by the way. Yeah, we could be here all day, right, until the cows come home, as we say. Yeah? So, what about neighborliness? This is narrated in a hadith in Bukhari. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the following, and this is very interesting. By Allah, he does not truly believe. Wallahi la mu'min, right? By Allah, he doesn't truly believe. By Allah, he doesn't truly believe. By Allah, he doesn't truly believe. Allahu Akbar. This is like an emphatic psychological ploy to show the importance and emphasis of what's going on. Yes. Who doesn't truly believe? Think about the Sahaba now, the companions. Iman, faith, conviction in Allah and His Messenger is so central to their well-being, it's more important than their own lives, right? They're thinking, who the hell is this person? This is an important point. This is an ethical point. And what does the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? Well, actually, someone asked, who, O Messenger of Allah? And then he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, he whose neighbor is not safe from his mischief. Allahu Akbar. Right? And neighbors in Islam include Muslims and non-Muslims. That is a well-known definition, right? No. So, is Islam ethical? 100%, absolutely, without a doubt.
No, I think that was all demonstrated as well. Look, you can see why, obviously, Islam is, appealing to a lot of people, particularly in this day and age. A lot of the virtues you've mentioned there, the principles you've mentioned there, really resonate with people in what we mentioned before, where it seems to be an immoral playground that we're currently living in. But this then brings us to a point. These are some of the principles and the ethics that underlie Islam. I think the question then becomes, what is the Western normative ethical theories that exist, and where are people deriving, or how are they going about deriving their morality?
Yes. So this is a very, very good question. This would help us understand why Islamic ethics is actually superior, right? So, look, the main purpose of normative ethical theories are to justify or provide justifiable, which means they have to be rational, and to provide reliable, which means they have to work, reliable principles to determine what is right and wrong. So that's the main view of normative ethical theories, right? So the human mind is the kind of ultimate judge and is the reference point to try and provide justifiable and reliable principles to determine what is right and wrong, okay? So in the normative Western ethical theories, there are it basically includes standards, yeah, that are reference points in understanding what is right and wrong behavior and what is good and bad action. And there are three main groups of ethical theories: teleological, deontological, and virtue ethical theories, or virtue ethic theories. Now, I want to give you a caveat, a very important note. There's no point going to the philosophical deep discussions on these issues. Like, I have, a few postgrads in philosophy. I'm not saying that to blow my trumpet. I'm just saying that I know that it gets very deep, very complicated, very nuanced, and you could split the philosophical hair in many different ways, right?
Yeah, right.
We don't need to go into that, because our kind of discussion is to show why Allah should be referenced, and the Quran should be referenced, and the Sunnah should be referenced with regards to people's ethical worldview and their moral outlook, yeah, and how they should behave. This is extremely important. Therefore, the questions that we're going to be posing are foundational. We don't have to go into the nuances. And this is not saying, oh, we're not willing to go into the nuances. We are. If you want to have a philosophical discussion one day in a French coffee shop, having a nice coffee overlooking that glorified, what's that building, man? The Eiffel Tower. I don't think it's that pretty, to be honest. It's like a glorified electric pylon, whatever you call it.
Well,
right?
it used to be an antenna, didn't it?
Yeah, well, what was it? Well, there you go. It's a glorified antenna, man. It's a glorified antenna.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're not going to go into the caveats or the philosophical details. We just need to stick to the foundational questions, yeah, and that's very important. So I don't want people thinking, oh, he didn't mention this about virtue ethics, or he didn't mention this about deontological ethics, or he didn't mention this about teleological ethics and the different nuances. That's irrelevant for our discussion. Our discussion is to focus on what you call the foundational questions. So let's now start with teleological theories. Okay, so what does the word teleology mean? Well, it comes from the Greek word. I have a Greek background, so that helps, right? It reminds me of that film. Not to say that I promote films or suggest that you should watch that stuff. Some of that stuff is also very unethical. But there was a film called My Big Greek Fat Wedding, I believe, and the Greek dad always says, give me any word and I could find you that the root of that word is a Greek word, right?
Yes.
So maybe this is something similar.
Could be.
And notwithstanding that, by the way, I was not brought up nationalistic in any shape or form. My dad, he was more of a humanist than a nationalist from that perspective. And that was actually quite important for me in how I became Muslim as well, I believe. Because we didn't see people with regards to these like forced boundaries that, someone drew on a map, right? Especially from a kind of, modern, postmodern context, that many of our countries are actually forced boundaries that some colonialist drew on a map, and these people didn't love you, they didn't love your tradition or your values, and they probably killed your people and raped your women, and they usurped your resources, but they drew a line on a map, and we identify ourselves with those lines. Wallahi, I find that shocking. I find it bizarre. And this is
as arbitrary as the ethics are today, I think.
Yeah, I like the way you brought it back to the topic. You are very smart. You're very smart. So basically, teleological theories comes from the word teleology, and the etymology of it is a Greek word which means telos, which means the end, and logos is thought, idea, or reason. Yeah. So the teleological approach to ethics is also called consequentialism, because what does it do? It looks at the end result of an action, the telos, the end of an action, the consequence of a particular action. So teleological theories, whether it's ethical egoism or utilitarianism, they basically say that human action depends on the consequences of outcome of that action. So they would argue an action is good if its consequences facilitate well-being or happiness, benefits, right? A utility. And an action is wrong if its consequences facilitate ill-being or suffering or sadness. In other words, harms. Yeah. So from a
Hamza, just on this point, sorry. So is this referring to material harm, material benefit?
No, it's also psychological, right? So I think from the perspective of teleological ethics, it's about a well-being is an internal state, right? So yes, for someone, if they have a lot of material wealth, if they have food, shelter, and clothing, they're going to have well-being for sure, right? But if they're not allowed to leave their house and they're being oppressed, that is a physical reality, but also it creates an internal state, an ill state, a sad state, a state of suffering, which they feel oppressed. They're oppressed. They're being oppressed. Now, if someone is a recluse or someone is, an introvert, they probably are happy to stay at home all the time, right? For example, I know that's a good example, but you get the point. It's not just about the material stuff. It's also how it affects your internal psychological state as well, right?
Understood.
So from this perspective, teleological theories, in order for them to judge an action from a moral perspective, they would have to consider its actual or likely results. Because remember, this is probabilistic. You can't know for sure the full consequences of a particular action. So there are two main teleological theories. You have ethical egoism and utilitarianism, the teleological. And as we've just said, teleological moral theories locate moral goodness in the consequences of our behavior and not the behavior itself. And this is very important, right? It's the consequences of the particular behavior, right? So from this perspective, moral behavior from a teleological ethical perspective is goal directed. It's not action directed. This action has a certain goal, right? What is the goal? What are the outcomes of that particular action? Yeah, that's very important. So one famous teleological theory is called utilitarianism, right? And utilitarianism requires the moral agent to foresee, to look into the consequences of their action. And in any given situation, they have to consider the available alternative courses of actions, right? Because why? Because they argue that you have to have a course of action that would result in maximum utility or maximal usefulness or maximal well-being and happiness. Now, these consequentialist theories of utilitarianism can be found in the 19th century philosophers such as Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And there's lots of philosophical discussions on their limitations and problems and so on and so forth, but we don't have to get into that. We're talking about the foundational questions here. So what utilitarianism says is, rather than maximize individual welfare, which would be more attuned to ethical egoism, utilitarianism focuses on the collective welfare of people, right? So here's a principle. It identifies moral goodness with the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. And this is called the greatest happiness principle. And therefore, it identifies moral badness or immorality as producing more pain or ill-being than happiness for the greatest number of people concerned. So the point here is, take a course of action that maximizes happiness or minimizes sadness or suffering for the greatest number of people, okay? From a net assessment perspective, not the individual. That's more ethical egoism, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, so deontological theories, right? The term deontology, lo and behold, again, the etymology comes from another Greek word, deon, which means duty or obligation, or that which is necessary, hence moral necessity, yeah? And generally speaking, the deontological approach to ethics rejects the moral worth of any action, depending on its consequences. So it says the morality of an action is not dependent on its consequences. Yeah? And there are three broad categories of deontological ethics: agent-centered deontological theories, patient-centered deontological theories, and contractualist deontological theories. No point to discuss them. That's a massive philosophical discussion. Leave it to the philosophers and the thinkers, and it's not necessary for our discussion. Yeah.
Yes.
So in general, what is deontological approach to ethics? It basically holds that moral agents have to rigorously fulfill their moral duties or obligations, and they do that unmindful of the consequences, right? So there's something about the action itself. Remember, in consequentialist theories and teleological theories, it's not about the action itself; it's the consequence of the action. It's goal directed. But for deontological theorists, ethical theorists, they say no, it's about the moral action in of itself, right? So from that perspective, deontological ethics, they argue that the moral worth of an action does not depend on the consequences, but a different criteria should be used. So, for example, they would say that, character assassination is wrong and inhuman, even if it produces good consequences. They may argue that. And I think a better example is to look at the early 19th century America, right? So the anti-slavery movement. So many members of the anti-slavery movement, they had a deontological approach to ethics. They basically said that slavery is wrong, even if it benefits the slaveholders, and even if it benefits the Southern American society in general. Because slavery, one would argue, increased the collective well-being of a particular majority. For example, the Southern Americans, right? A particular majority concerning the social and economic well-being. But they would say, forget the consequences. We're not utilitarian on this issue. We're not adopting a teleological ethics here. We are deontological. The action itself is morally wrong, irrespective of the consequences. So according to this theory, they would say that there are some moral obligatory things that we have to do, irrespective of the consequences, such as abolishing slavery, right? And one of the most influential deontological theorists was developed by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, right? Now, this moves on to the third and final group or category of ethics or approach to ethics, which is virtue ethics. So what does virtue ethics do? Well, it basically is a bit of a paradigm shift. It says, okay, let's move away from the analytical emphasis of rule-based decision-making, meaning deontological ethics. Let's move away from there's something more about the action in of itself. And let's move away from the goal-directedness of a particular action, meaning the consequences of an action. And now let's start thinking about the ethics of the individual and the virtue of human character, the virtues in one's human character. For example, a teleologist, someone who is a consequentialist or ethical hedonist or ethical egoist or a utilitarian, they would say that giving charity is good. Why? Not because of the action in of itself, because of its goal directedness, because of its consequence, because it maximizes well-being in society. Okay. A deontologist would say, irrespective of the consequences, giving charity is good in of itself. We have a duty, right? A duty to help others. Now, virtue ethicists, what would they say? They would say, look, let's point to another fact. Let's point to the fact that helping others displays a desirable virtue, such as being charitable and benevolent. If your way of being, if the way you relate to yourself and you relate to others is charitable, and you have this virtuous trait, then you're more likely to do these actions anyway. And one would argue that this is maybe a better way of being because you're more likely to be moral, because it's part of your internal identity. It's part of who you are as a virtuous person. And that's why virtue ethics is very interesting for many people. And it has a connection to Islamic ethics as well, because it considers the intention and it considers the moral context. For example, if you want to outweigh moral actions and those two moral actions are the same, like two people give $10 in charity, a kind of consequentialist would be like, yeah, that's a good action because it increases and maximizes well-being in society. A deontologist would say that's a good action because the action in of itself is good, giving charity, even if it's $10. But the virtue ethicist would say, okay, well, hold on a second. Yes, it's a good action because you're virtuous, you're being charitable, but it depends on the context. If a billionaire, if all they gave once every 10 years was $10, are they being charitable? Do they have that virtue? No. But if a poor person gave $10 every day, they're being sacrificial and they're being very charitable. They have that virtue. So the virtue ethicist would see the context behind the action as well, and the intention, the moral variables, if you like, yeah? And
there's a hadith to this effect, right? Like the example you gave, there's a hadith to this effect with respect to the Sahaba. There might actually be a more accurate one, but the one that I recall is the Sahaba talking about, to the Prophet ﷺ, giving charity, and they don't have wealth, some of them, and so they will, and the Prophet ﷺ said, removing a stick from the path is charity, and he gave several examples of what it is. But there's another one in terms of the person who gives as well, and the measure of which they give based on how much they have. So it seems to align very closely with sort of Islamic concept.
And if you give out of what you love, right? That's piety, right? That's righteousness, right? Because some people may not love money, right? Which may be rare, and they just give it freely. But they may love other things. They may love status or position, and although that they shouldn't be in that position, they should give it to someone else, they hold on to it, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
there's a context behind this. What about
SubhanAllah.
in terms of the punishments, right? An old man who commits zina gets more punishment than the young man, right? The context is clear. He's old, right? He's lived a life. His kind of physical drives are much less than the youth. So he has less, what would you call it? Less excuse, if you want to use such terminology, right? And this is known in Islam, that it's based on the moral context. So,
Yeah.
virtue ethics is quite appealing to many people from that perspective. Now, I just want to
Yes.
make something very clear here. There is some nuance, right? And what is the nuance? I want to quote the academics Rosalind Hursthouse and Glenn Pettigrove. Now, what they're basically saying is, just because you follow deontological ethics, it doesn't mean you can't consider virtues and you can't consider some consequences. Just because you're a virtue ethicist, it doesn't mean you can't consider some moral duties and obligations and you can't consider some consequences. Just because you're utilitarian or a consequentialist, it doesn't mean you can't consider some moral duties and some moral virtues. It's more gray than that, right? And that's why they say, this is not to say that only virtue ethicists attend to virtues any more than it is to say that only consequentialists attend to consequences or deontologists to rules. Each of the above mentioned approaches can make room for virtues, consequences, and rules. Indeed, any plausible normative ethical theory would have something to say about all three. What distinguishes, so then they start talking about virtue ethics, and they say what distinguishes virtue ethics from consequentialism or deontology is the centrality of virtue within a theory. Because consequentialists, for example, will define virtue traits that yield good consequences, and deontologists will define them as traits possessed by those who reliably fulfill their duties. Virtue ethicists will resist that attempt, and they would basically say that virtues are taken to be more fundamental, right? So for the consequentialist, they'll say, well, virtues are traits that yield good consequences. For the deontologist, they would say, well, virtues are traits possessed by those people who fulfill their duties. But virtue ethicists would say, no, virtues are foundational. They're fundamental to the ethical. Yeah. So I don't wanted to put that in there just to understand that there's more nuances. But these are the three kind of areas of normative ethical theories, the main normative ethical theories: teleological, which is about the consequences; deontological, which is about the moral duties; and you also have virtue ethics, which is about the virtues that an individual has, right? So these are the three main areas.
Okay, well done. That was quite a task. So thank you for summarizing that. So I guess we sort of mentioned that there's, you can see where, or not where, but you can see an overlap with Islam in some of these very quickly, just based on the way you laid out a couple of them. But of course, there are shortfalls and shortcomings with these. So what are the key problems that these theories have in light with Islamic moral epistemology?
Yeah, so look, I'm not a fan of adopting forced epistemological and metaphysical assumptions as lenses to understand the deen. We should understand the deen as it is, right? But yes, if you look at the questions raised by the theological ethicists, the questions raised by the virtue ethicists, the questions raised by the deontologists, if you like, those questions can relate to the Islamic discourse, because we have a sense of duty to Allah. We have a sense of understanding the intention and moral context, like the virtue ethicists. We have an understanding of also the consequences of actions, right? Because if, sometimes we have to address the maslaha and the mafsada, the harms and the benefits, but that itself is understood within the Islamic paradigm, which is revelation, Allah and His Messenger, not just solely the human mind. So this is a very good question. So what are the problems in light of Islamic moral epistemology? Well, the biggest problem is this, and this is how we show the superiority of Islam, that they make the ultimate judge the human mind, and the human mind is the foundational reference point to formulate ethics and morality. That's not to say the aql doesn't have a role, and we're going to discuss that later, the intellect. But this is the main approach of the normative ethical theories, that they make the ultimate judge the human mind, and the human mind is the foundational reference point to formulate ethics and morality. So they're rational ethical theories. And there are a few questions we should raise in order to understand why Islamic ethics or Islamic ethical epistemology is superior. So from the point of view of teleological ethics, let's raise this foundational question. Can the human mind fully investigate the full consequences or implications of one's moral behavior? Is there a secular bias or a metaphysical bias in investigating the consequences of one moral action? For example, if you ignore or reject the hereafter, then your assessment of the consequences can be considered incomplete because you're not looking at the consequences of the full reality. And the full reality is not just the dunya, it's also the akhirah, right? So these are very important foundational questions. What about deontological ethics? Can the human mind fully understand what moral values and duties are? Who is the judge? To whom do we owe these duties to, right? Aren't duties owed? Yeah, but to whom? Who can make the universal moral claim and judgment? How do we prioritize them? How do we apply them? Yes, this is about applied ethics. It's not about ethical epistemology. It's not that, or moral epistemology. But that's an important question too. How do we apply these ethics, which is about applied ethics? Now, from a virtue ethics point of view, right, being virtuous is great. Being charitable is great. Being compassionate is great. But what are these virtues? Who decides them? Who prioritizes them? And again, how do you manifest them, right? Like we were talking before offline, right? We were talking about, well, it was online, but it was off live, yeah? Or off recording. We're talking about the concept of tolerance, right? Fine, yeah. Tolerance as an abstract idea is great, but there's no such thing as a boundless tolerance. Who draws the line and where? Who draws the line? Who draws the line and where? Again, that's a very important question. What about compassion? Compassion is good, but too much compassion could be actually bad. It could be not compassionate to be too compassionate, right? Sometimes you have this understanding of tough love, right? Yeah. Who draws the line with regards to these issues? How do you apply them and in what context? These are all very important things. So here are the two answers. The human mind or the one who created the human mind? Allah. Allahu Akbar. Allah. As simple as this answer is, it is actually quite phenomenal. Because you have two options here. You either have the mind to be the ultimate judge for ethics, the mind to be the foundational reference point to formulate ethics and morality, or you use your God-given mind to understand Allah's commands. And we know his commands are perfect and are good for us because of who Allah is. Allah is Al-Bar, he is the source of all goodness. He is the greatest benefactor. Allah is Al-Hakim, the wise. Allah is Al-Alim, the knowing. He has the picture, we got the pixel, and so on and so forth. So by virtue of who Allah is, because of Allah's nature, names and attributes, his reality, his commands, by virtue of that, only a fool, and I don't say this in an unethical way, only, I say this, it's deliberate use of language, a fool would reject Allah and just use their own limited mind as the ultimate judge and the own limited mind as the only foundational reference point to formulate ethics and rules. If you know who Allah is, then you're going to obey him. That's why obedience in Islam is the most rational thing to do. It is the peak of rationality, because sometimes in a secular perspective, oh, you guys obey God, how backward and medieval. Hold on a second. Let's reframe the narrative here. Who are we obeying? Allah, maximally perfect, transcendent names and attributes. They are to the highest degree possible. He is the knowing, the wise. He has the picture. We got the pixel. We have a pixelated understanding of reality, right?
Yes.
It's only rational to obey him because he is the ultimate authority, the king of all kings. You obey people, don't you? Even if you study Western epistemology, you study the epistemology of testimony. Do you know everything by first-hand experience? No. You have to rely on the say-so of others, right? When you go to a doctor, you don't have the qualifications or the experience or the background, and you give them your symptoms, and they say you have this disease, take this medicine. Do you start challenging them? Fine, you might have a second opinion, but that second opinion is still their say-so. And then when you get the drugs or the prescription or the medicine, are you going to start now analyzing the chemical molecular structure of the compound? No, you accept it. And that's why, Dr. Elizabeth Fricker, she makes a very interesting point. She says, given my limitations as parametric, I have to rely on the authority of other people.
Yes.
We do this all the time. We
Yeah.
submit to authorities all the time. When I'm on a plane, there's turbulence. I don't know much about the science of flying or turbulence. And the pilot says, we're going to have some severe turbulence. Please sit down and buckle up, right? I'm going to sit down and buckle up and start making dua, doing some dhikr, right? I'm going to supplicate to my Lord and start remembering him.
Yeah,
I'm not going to start moonwalking on the aisle. If I just start walking on the aisle, yeah? That would be an irrational thing to do. So if in our day-to-day experience, even atheists, the most hardest atheists that believe in empiricism and reason and all that stuff, right? These kind of fake, empty slogans that they use sometimes, because in my view, atheism is the most foolish approach, by virtue of what Allah said. Only a fool would reject the way of Abraham, right? The way of Tawheed, oneness of Allah, and by virtue of that includes Allah's existence. You reject that, then with all due respect, it's an irrational position. No. Point being is that they submit to authorities all the time. What we're saying is we're submitting to the ultimate authority. Isn't that the most rational thing to do?
Yes.
So from that perspective, obedience to Allah's commands is the most rational thing. So only a fool will reject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
You actually wrote in your essay, I think the No God, No Good. You said the fact that morality comes from divine commands gives morals meaning because being moral would be responding to these commands. In other words, we have moral duties and these are owed to God. So I think that summarizes the point very nicely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. No,
so there is the next related question to this, right?
Yes. Yes, there is. So the question is, what role does Allah have in this discussion?
Well, we've summarized it in this question, but I think let's unpack it a little bit more. So, see, when we focus on Allah and His nature, His reality, His revelation, the previous questions are answered. The foundational questions that we raise concerning teleological ethics, deontological ethics, and virtue ethics. And given the fact that the human mind is limited, it has a pixelated understanding of moral realities, then when we focus on who Allah is, we realize that Allah is the reference with regards to how we should act and how we should behave and what is right and what is wrong. So take, for example, the universal moral claim. Allah can make the universal moral claim. Allah is not limited. There is nothing external to Allah that limits Him. His knowledge and wisdom, His Al-Alim, Al-Hakim, are maximally perfect without any deficiency or flaw, right? And He transcends the contingent and created reality. Therefore, He could make the universal moral claim. Also, Allah has the full moral picture, if you want to see it from a consequentialist point of view. Because of who Allah is, His nature, His Al-Alim, Al-Hakim, and so on and so forth, He has the full and complete understanding of the consequences of moral action, right? So Allah has the full moral picture. He will make that command, and that command is best for humanity and our well-being. Also, Allah is the ultimate judge, and we have a duty towards Him. Because of who Allah is, right? Al-Ilah, right? Some of the Arabic linguists say Allah is Al-Ilah, the deity, right? And we believe, obviously, He's the only deity worthy of worship. And He is the ultimate judge. And because of the fact that He is all-knowing, all-wise, He is the ultimate judge. He is the ultimate authority. And He is the ultimate judge and authority with regards to what is good conduct and bad conduct, what we should do and should not do. And we have an obligation to follow Allah's commands, because He's the only being worthy of worship, and He is the ultimate authority, as we just discussed, which includes obedience and submission. And remember, the being that is the only being worthy of worship is also maximally good from that perspective. Allah, one of His names is Al-Bar, the greatest benefactor, the source of all goodness, if you like. So from this perspective, because of Allah's maximal perfection, He is all-knowing, all-wise, the ultimate authority, the King of Kings. He is, all-knowing, all-wise, all of that stuff that we mentioned. Then He is the ultimate judge, and we have an obligation and a duty towards Him. Yeah. Also, He defines and prioritizes our virtues, right? And by virtue of Allah's nature, and I know there's not a pun here, but it basically means because of Allah's nature, because of Allah's reality, He is the ultimate reference of what is virtuous and how to prioritize His virtues based on what we've just said previously. Allah has the picture, we got the pixel, He's all-knowing, He's all-wise, He's the ultimate authority, He knows what's best for us, He doesn't command evil, He commands goodness, and so on and forth, and His commands are good, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a key point that we need to understand here. All of what we just said depends on believing Allah and His Messenger. So the discussion moves away from normative ethics to theophilosophy. So once we can show Allah is a reality, He is worthy of worship, He has revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah, then the conversation should be had around those things in order to understand what is truly good. But obviously we could talk about that when we talk about how to use discussion in the context of da'wah. But yeah, so this is the role of Allah in the discussion, which we've echoed in the previous question as well. But it's a very important point for people to understand, because when it comes to ethics and morality, we need to ask the question, where is Allah in the conversation? And that's what we have to always bring it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once we understand who Allah is, His nature, names and attributes, maximal perfection, He is the King of Kings, He is all-knowing, all-wise, He has the picture, we got the pixel, then we have a duty towards Him, and it's rational to obey Him, and His commands are gonna have the greatest consequences for our well-being as individuals and as a collective.
Fantastic. So I think that actually segues nicely into the next part, because theoethics sort of it has a lot of people put forward this sort of argument with respect to Euthyphro's dilemma, and that being that is something morally good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is morally good?
Yes, this is a very popular atheist contention or naturalistic contention against divine command theory, against the commands of Allah, and it's popularized all over the internet. Even the book by Alam Shah, who left Islam, he wrote a book called The Young Atheist Handbook, and he mentions it even in there. So it's popularized even amongst young atheists. Yeah. But before we get to this, I think it's very important just to have a really quick note about the role of the aql, the intellect, because sometimes people think, oh, you guys reject the intellect. No, we don't. There is a role for the intellect when it comes to morality, and there's two main roles. The first role is, you can't understand Allah's commands without the aql. You need the aql, the intellect, to understand what the legislator, Allah, has said, what He has commanded. To have moral knowledge from an Islamic perspective, you have to look at the Quran and the Sunnah and reason over them. You have to use your rational faculties to understand what did Allah actually say and intend, and bring all the evidences together. That's very important.
Of course.
The second thing that's very important is, in the Islamic tradition, the aql can come to an understanding of what is naturally good, or fitri, right? The innate normative disposition based on the fitra, what is naturally good, and some normative ethical principles. From my understanding, there is no difference of opinion amongst the schools of creed on this issue, that the aql can come to a conclusion of what is naturally good and some normative ethical general principles. For example, if I said to you, is following the truth a moral value? Is it good or bad? You say it's good.
Of course.
You don't need revelation for that, right? If I said to you, saving lives, is it morally good? Yes, it is morally good. Yes. Is humiliating one's parents morally evil? Yes, it's morally evil.
Yes.
These things, if you have a sound rational faculties, right, you will come to the conclusion that there are some normative natural ethics, normative principles and natural ethics that we should follow. However, we need revelation for the following. How do you apply these principles in various contexts? How do you prioritize these ethical principles and morals even in a particular context as well? How do you prioritize them, and how do you apply them? Number 3, how do we know what actions are going to have a divine reward and divine punishment? Right? So what are the manifestation of these virtues, right? So all of these things are so important, which gives you a complete moral picture. So you can't just have the mind as the only reference and the ultimate judge for your ethics. This is the problem with the normative ethical theories. Yes, in general, we could say you can use your aql, your intellect, to understand what the commands of Allah are. You have to. And in terms of investigating what did Allah intend? What does the verse mean? How do you correlate it to hadith that explains it? How do you outweigh competing evidences? And there's a methodology at play. But the point here is, so you do that. Then the other aspect of using the aql is, we know what naturally is good, and we could form some natural ethical principles using our aql, our intellect, which such as you shouldn't kill people, you should save lives, following the truth is good, don't humiliate your parents. Fantastic. But morality is far more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
Especially from a functional point of view, how to live a life, because life is context, yeah? So you need revelation to know how to apply these principles in various contexts, to know how to apply these morals in various contexts, to understand how to prioritize them, to inform us which actions are going to have a divine punishment or divine reward, and so on and so forth. And that will give you the complete moral picture. This is why we don't reject the aql, we don't make it solely foundational, and we don't make it the sole reference. And that is very, very important to understand. So Euthyphro's dilemma. This is an interesting one. And in my own intellectual journey, I really thank you guys. Wallah, OnePath Network, Jazakallah khair. I spent time with 3 scholars yesterday discussing ethical principles and making sure that what I'm going to say is sound and is not just contingent on one particular school or understanding of Islam. And I wanted this to be as universally accepted as possible. And so I had a late night meeting with Sheikh Yasser Al-Hanafi and Sheikh Abdul Rahman Mihirig. And it was mind-blowing because I wanted to solve this divine command theory issue concerning Euthyphro's dilemma, right? And Jazakallah khair, this is the first time I'm articulating it, so may Allah bless you guys and give you the answer.
Alhamdulillah. Ameen, likewise, inshallah.
So is it good because God commanded it, or is it good because the commands of God are good? And this is a conception of a modern conception of Euthyphro's dilemma. And it's a false dilemma. But why do they think it's a dilemma? They think it's dilemma is because if you take one horn of the dilemma, which is it is good because God commanded it, then what they say is you make good arbitrary. That there should be nothing in this universe that you should recognize as good or evil. God's commands are arbitrary because he could have commanded everyone who turns to the age of 50 should be killed, right? And just by virtue of him commanding it, then it would be a good thing. So there's nothing that you should intuitively and normatively and naturally recognize as good or evil. The other horn of the dilemma is, well, is it good because the commands of God are good? Well, here's a problem, because what you've done now, if you know the commands of God are good, then you already know what good is, because you're using this external standard of good to judge God's commands, therefore you don't need his commands anymore, which would be a huge problem for theists, especially Muslims. This is a false dilemma. And I learned this from Sheikh Abdul Rahman Mihirig, and he derived this from an argument from the great scholar Sheikh Shah Wali Allah Dahlawi. He wrote the book, The Conclusive Argument for God. And it's one paragraph, but I thought it was genius, especially from a kind of internal theophilosophical creedal discussions amongst the Maturidis, the Ash'ira, and the Atharis, and even the Mutazilites. This one, I don't think no one would disagree with this, right? So, Allah's commands, this is how you deal with the dilemma. So we reject one horn of the dilemma. We don't say it is good because the commands of God are good, right? Because we're not saying there is an external standard to judge God's commands. So we reject that. We're more in line with the first horn that's mentioned here, which is it is good because God commanded it, but it's not arbitrary. So it's a false dilemma. Because the dilemma only works if you believe it's arbitrary. God's commands are arbitrary, but they're not. Why? And think about this. This is genius. This was genius. When I had this yesterday, I was like, Allahu Akbar, yeah? Allah's commands manifested in Islamic moral and legal law addresses the moral needs of human beings on a personal, social, and political level. The commands of Allah are like a key that fit perfectly in a lock that opens the door to the well-being of the individual and society. A key is designed for a lock. And just like the key is designed for a lock, the commands of Allah are designed for our well-being. Therefore, it's completely irrational and absurd to claim that Allah's commands are arbitrary. Because it would be equivalent of saying that the key that has been designed for a specific lock was done without any design, without any reason, without any prior causal conditions. It was just done by haphazard chance. And that is irrational and absurd. Therefore, Allah's commands are not arbitrary because it's just like a lock, a key that fits into a lock. And that for me was a phenomenal answer because it transcends the other issues in the different schools of creed on how they try to address this issue. And this is in line with the Athari view, the Maturidi view, and the Ash'ari, and even the Mutazilites, right? So I felt it was phenomenal. It was such a good answer because it shows, just by virtue of even understanding the nature of these laws and rulings on an individual and social and political level, that when you see that there is no arbitrariness in them, just by virtue of them actually increasing the well-being and decreasing the suffering of the individual and society, and it fitting like a glove, right? A hand fits right into the glove. The key unlocks the door to the reliability of these principles and these commands. Yeah. So from that perspective, it is irrational to claim that they're arbitrary. It would be equivalent of saying that, if you go to a public park and you see an arrangement of flowers and it says "I love you," then you would claim that arrangement of flowers just happened by chance or just a gust of the wind. No, it's not. It's actually it's responsible by the local council, the local government, or a gardener. It's not just, you don't rely on the arbitrary notion of just random chance. That would be an irrational postulation. So from that perspective, Allah's commands are not arbitrary. So yes, it is because Allah commanded it, but His commands are not arbitrary. Therefore, it is a false dilemma. Allahu Akbar. And I would just summarize all of this with the words of the 14th century scholar, Ibn al-Qayyim. He says, verily, the Sharia, Islamic law, which, remember, Sharia includes ethics and moral code of conduct and so on and so forth, is founded upon wisdom and welfare for the servants in this life and the afterlife. In its entirety is justice, mercy, benefit, and wisdom. Every matter which abandons justice for tyranny, mercy for cruelty, benefit for corruption, and wisdom for foolishness is not part of the Sharia, even if it was introduced therein through an interpretation. So that, for me, deals with this threefold dilemma. And Jazakallah for the opportunity for me to investigate this further as well.
So if we move the conversation forward a little bit now, and we start looking at the relationship between legal and moral reasoning in Islam, so that we can start segueing into some other more sort of topical points. So what is the relationship between legal and moral reasoning?
So, and this is general, right? So the relation between legal and moral reasoning is, in general, whatever is halal, whatever is legal, moral in Islam is morally good, is tayyib. And whatever is good, morally good, is halal, right? But the question is, how do we know it is halal? And this is the job of the legal and moral thinkers, philosophers, and jurists in the Islamic tradition, and those that are qualified, of course. Now, what we can say, because I'm not qualified to derive rulings in any shape or form, but what we can say in principle, that there is a methodology that is used to deduce and find out what is halal and haram, good and evil. And what does this involve? This involves taking all of the corpus of the evidences, the Quran and the Sunnah together, including the principles derived from them, and that you consider the letter and the spirit of the law, the aims of the law, the hikmah of the ahkam, and the rationalization of the various hikmah of the ahkam are categorized into certain categories, which are called the maqasid, the higher objects of Islamic law or Islamic moral legal reasoning. And the Islamic scholars use their rational faculties over the Quran and Sunnah with a sound methodology to derive what is good and bad for various contexts. So this is how we know what is good and bad, right? You know, all the kind of nuanced questions that we asked about who prioritizes moral values, how do we apply them, in what context, and so on and so forth. So there is not a clear distinction between the legal and the moral in the Islamic domain, right? Although in the Western tradition, there's more of a distinction, but in the Islamic tradition, that's not the case. However, and there's a subtle note to add here. There are instances, if you just take the letter of the law and you remove other principles, and for example, we have key principles in Islam called, the maslaha, the benefit should outweigh the harms, especially if it's scenarios where you have you have to apply a principle, not a direct ruling or a command, but a principle, an Islamic ethical principle on something. You have to outweigh the maslaha and the mafsada, the harms and the benefits. So if you ignore that, if you ignore the spirit of the law and just stick to the letter because you have a sickness in your heart, then there could be abuses and there could be things that could be maybe seen as not the right thing to do, but it's still legal. Yeah. For example, a man can technically divorce his wife before his death just to escape the inheritance obligations, right? That's legal from an Islamic legal perspective, but would that be something that is praiseworthy? Probably not. Again, if someone marries a revert sister and she lives in a non-Muslim land, there are no masajid, there are no mosques, there's no community, there's nothing to help and support her, and he, knowing this, divorces her without consideration for her iman, for her faith, without consideration for her well-being, the divorce may be valid. It's valid legally, most likely, but obviously it's valid, but it could be haram. He could be sinful for this, right? Because he hasn't considered the maslaha and the mafsada, the harms and the benefits. He hasn't considered the spirit of the law. So when we're talking about the connection between legal and moral reasoning, there could be a slight distinction, but it's not as wide as in the Western tradition. And generally speaking, what is halal is morally good, right? And what is haram is morally bad. And the methodology to derive that is using a methodology that is sound, that's considering the letter and the spirit of the law, the aims of the law, the hikmah of the ahkam, the wisdom of the rulings, including the maqasid, including the high intents objectives of Islamic law. And the scholars use the rational faculties over the Quran and Sunnah to derive what is best. And by the way, just a quick point on the maqasid. The maqasid has been abused by a lot of modernists, right? They say, just take the maqasid, take the high intents, preservation of life, preservation of the mind, and so on and so forth, preservation of religion. Take the high intents of Islamic law and forget the particulars. We're not advocating this type of approach. This is not a sound approach. The sound approach is that you respect the maqasid, but you also understand that the maqasid are as a result of the rationalization of the wisdoms of the ahkam, and the ahkam came from the text. So to take the maqsad, which is one of the maqasid, to take the maqasid and to reject the text is equivalent of rejecting the maqasid because it came from the text in the first place. But it's very sophisticated moral legal reasoning. Take, for example, a qiyas. You make an analogy, right? And you do an analogy based on understanding what is the right thing to do from an Islamic perspective. There is a scholarly case where if you have an analogy, and that analogy, the strong analogy, the strongest logical form of the analogy, its consequences go against the maqasid of the Sharia. What the scholar could do is take the weaker analogy if it's in line with the maqasid of the Sharia. That's how the interplay between these things. Obviously, I'm not saying this to claim I'm a scholar. I'm not a scholar in any shape or form. This was told to me by a scholar, so I'm just echoing what they've said because I just want to be very consistent here. I don't give rulings for power or stuff like that. But this is a very powerful principle just to get you to see how amazing and nuanced the way we derive moral and legal rulings in various contexts in the Islamic tradition. So, good question.
No, that's fantastic. So to move the conversation along then, what is the role of ideology or worldviews in the context of moral and legal reasoning?
Look, here's a thought experiment. Right? I want you to ask any Tom, Dick, and Abdullah, Tom, Dick, and Harry, in any street in the Western or Eastern world, right? And ask the average person on the street and say to them this: can you guarantee, would you put your life on this? Would you risk your life on this issue? Can you guarantee that what you think is good or bad has nothing to do with, is unrelated to, or not dictated by in any way with regards to the social and political norms of where you brought up? Can you guarantee that what you think is good or bad has nothing to do with, is unrelated to, is not dictated by the social and political norms of where you were brought up? I am telling you, every sincere human being was going to say no.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to say no.
Of course.
Yeah. Of course, how can I say that? I'm a product of my environment.
Yes.
And this is why it's so important the environment, political environment, the social environment, and your peers, your friends is so critical with your own Islamic understanding and your Islamic well-being. Yeah, it's so important. Yeah? So your worldview or the ideological, political, and worldview context of where you brought up is going to shape your affinity or your inclinations towards what is right and wrong. Okay. Take liberalism, for example. If you study liberalism, it's a disputatious set of doctrines, but generally speaking, the kind of foundation or philosophical assumption or foundation of liberalism is what you call individualism or atomism, yeah? Which really is the view of the self as an abstract entity divorced from social obligations or attachments. That was the words of the feminist philosopher, actually, Marian Friedman. But even if you don't take that view, say it's the primacy on the individual, not society, the individual, right? And this creates a sense of individualism. And one would argue individualism is actually the cause for social fragmentation and decay. There was a report in 2004, I think it was 2004, it was called the Children's Society Report, and they concluded that, you know, American or British kids or both, there's social fragmentation and decay, the breakdown of the family because of excessive individualism, right? So from a moral perspective, if you have that as your ideological assumptions, yeah, or your ideological premise, or it's part of your worldview, even if it's known or unknown, it could be subconscious, right? Just because you've been internalized in this neoliberal culture. And if you combine that with capitalism, take the ethical question of when my parents get old, where shall I put them? Now, generally speaking, it's seen as morally okay to send your parents to an old people's home. Now, don't get me wrong, there are nuances in the Islamic tradition based on context that if, for example, there's a single mother, she's working, she's no one supporting her, she can't take care of her parents, there is no society to take care of the parents, she may have to do that too. So there may be nuances and variables. I get that. But in general, we have to appreciate that individualism, liberalism combined with capitalism, that worldview would be like, well, there's nothing wrong with my parents being in an old people's home. They're safe and they're fine, right? They're safe and they're fine. And because, you know, we have a primary ethic of me, the individual, the society. And if you combine that with capitalism, economic progress, old people don't work anymore. They don't provide for society. Yeah, they used to, but so what? What about now? They're not giving nothing back. We just have to give to them. So from their own ethical paradigm and the philosophical and political assumptions or worldview, ideological assumptions, they would say it's fine. But for the Muslim, an old people's home is just a synonym of a concentration camp. You're taking your parents to a concentration camp. Come on, let's be serious here. Forget the philosophical mumbo jumbo here. You ask any parent that has been that is family centric and orientated, that is traditional, irrespective of religion, irrespective of worldview, and you truly ask them, deep in their heart, would you rather be with your family, loving family, or would be a bunch of strangers to take care of you for your last few years? I guarantee you the majority would say I want to be with my family.
Yeah, no doubt. Actually, so
it's a moving thing, man. You know, it's moving. And that now has become okay because we think it's morally fine because they're safe and well and they could eat and they could have food, right? But the problem here is based on your kind of capitalist worldview, which is based on money, benefit, financial benefit, capital, and based on individualism, which is the primary of the primacy on the individual. That forms your moral outlook now. But for us, we could reframe it and say, no, that's an old people's home is a concentration camp for old people. And, you know, and we have a duty from Allah to honor our parents, to take care of our parents, and so on and so forth. So that's the role of ideology. What about the role of consent? And I'm not just talking about sexual consent, just consent, right? Neoliberal and postmodern commitments. You know, postmodernism in general is that there is no objective methodology to give you objective facts, right? It's context, language, it's fluid, all of that stuff. These people, with all due respect, evil people, right, will blur the lines of what is consent for underage kids with regards to gender transition. These kids can't vote, they can't get married, they can't drink, and so on and so forth, drink alcohol, that is. But yet, they would basically take them on this path to transition them physically and emotionally and socially, to become another agenda. So when it comes to these ideologically twisted ideas, the lines of consent are blurred. But now the lines of consent are redrawn, and they're very clear when it comes to the context of adult sexual relations. It's slightly inconsistent. And kufr, rejecting the truth, would always contradict itself. Take the penal code. Liberals, if they have an individualistic mindset, they just see primacy on the individual. They don't see the Islamic holistic perspective where the individual impacts society and society impacts the individual. If they have an individualistic view on this, they're going to say some of the punishments in Islam are wrong and harsh, barbaric. But that's because they come from a certain premise, a secular liberal premise, based on their own philosophical assumptions.
Yes.
We need to change the lenses that they have on their eyes. And we need to give them a comprehensive outlook. And we say, based on a careful consideration of the balance between the society and individual and society, and based on our own kind of social hierarchy and framework, and levels in society, or kind of layers in society that try and prevent the crime in the first place. Because in the Islamic model, you propagate good values. Classically, under liberalism, the government should stay silent on what is the conception of the good life. But we say, no, we have a conception of the good life, we propagate it. And we remove the kind of, we put obstacles to crime. For example, we won't get people to identify themselves by material gain, like you have in a liberal capitalist society, which is going to be a driving force to maybe be a little bit more egoistic, a bit more individualistic. And maybe if you have to stab someone in the back just to, get something good in life, you will. And if you have to basically cheat and steal and evade, you will, because the primary thing here is for me to have capital, right? And it's all about me, the individual. So we're not going to have that kind of social political worldview paradigm that infects the minds and the hearts of human beings, and diseases that makes them diseased, essentially. It takes them away from the natural normative human disposition, right? So we're not going to have that. So we're going to have obstacles in place to prevent crime in the first place. And we have conditions in place. And we have, it's not just, beyond reasonable doubt, because, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it's better to release 9 people that are guilty than to have one innocent person to be punished. So you have to be really certain that they did it, and within a certain criteria. And we have, very robust legal mechanisms in place. But the point is, they don't see it from our paradigm. And because they have the ideological and philosophical assumptions or false lenses, they would see, okay, this is unjust or this is wrong, because they have those ideological lenses. So sometimes what we do as Muslims, we forget about that and we just discuss the abstract details, which is problematic, because they're going to be seeing those details or those laws from what perspective? From the perspective of individualism or liberalism or secularism, right? So those lenses are going to shape their understanding of what you're talking about. And what you're talking about is already shaped by a particular understanding, which is Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. He's worthy of worship. This is true. We believe in the balance between the individual and society and the individual. So you're both seeing the same thing, but you're seeing it with different lenses. It's like me looking at a wall and telling you it's green because I've got green glasses on, and you're looking at the wall and saying it's yellow because you've got yellow glasses on. We're going to debate all day, man. You're going to say it's yellow, I'm going to say it's green. We need to exchange glasses, or give you the right glasses, the right lenses to use in order to understand reality as it is. And that's why it's very important. Muslims should not fall for the epistemological and metaphysical lizard hole, right? Don't adopt false secular liberal assumptions in order to justify the deen. Allow the deen to speak for itself. And we're going to have some examples shortly. And when you see these examples, you're going to be like, wow, yeah, Islam is superior. Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar. That's fantastic. So we're going to go into those examples now. So how can we show the morality of Sharia law? But in particular here, let's use the example of women's inheritance in Islam.
Yeah, this is a good one, because these are hot potatoes, and I like to use hot potatoes to show the superiority of Islam, because why? It will give confidence to Muslims. And by the way, I know I'm coming across as very certain and coming across as assertive. I don't want this to be misinterpreted by the Muslim community, because we always teach that when you engage with non-Muslims, you always have compassion. That's the primary principle. You speak softly. you use wisdom, you are sincere to them. You want the best for them, and you want good for them, you want guidance for them. And you have a sense of hilm, forbearance. You repel anything by that which is better, as Allah says in Surah Fussilat, verse 34. So that's the approach, yeah? So take everything else I'm doing as, that kind of British Greek passion, yeah?
We accept.
Interpret it as that you just have to go at people. No, we don't advocate that in any shape or form. That's not the son of the process, yeah?
No.
So women's inheritance, this is a brilliant one, right? Because sometimes when people bring this up, when we have mentoring meetings, because part of our institute, we have lighthouse mentoring, and we do with shubuhat, destructive doubts, and so on and so forth. We're like, or we have similar meetings. And when we have similar meetings, I'm like, have you even read about this? No, you Googled this. Come on, have some adab, have some respect. You have an epistemic duty, you have a duty to knowledge to at least investigate a little bit, right? You heard a Fox News clip, you read something on Google, a one-liner, and now you have this crazy doubt. For God's sake, if you're going to pick what phone you're going to choose, you go into 1 hour commentaries on the, what do you call it, the reviews of technology reviews.
Yeah.
You start reading about the specs. You do go into details. But when it comes to so important matters like your worldview and ethics, you're like, I'm just going to take what Fox News says and I'm going to have a doubt. We need to get serious, yeah? And this is for Muslims and non-Muslims. We have an epistemic duty to at least have a justified doubt. Yeah, if you're going to doubt about something, at least let it be based on something justified, not something totally, based on ignorance. Anyway, nevertheless, women's inheritance. They say, women, they are intrinsically, lower than men, and they're not equal, and because women get, half inheritance of the man. Now, this is absolute nonsense. Nonsense on stilts, right? I think Jeremy Bentham said this, yeah, with regards to having a naturalistic understanding of human rights or something. He said it's nonsense on stilts, which relates to morals. But anyway, this is nonsense on stilts for sure. So look, when you look at the moral, remember when we talked about the methodology from the scholars about finding out what is moral and legal? So when you look at the kind of moral and legal reasoning in determination of the allocation of shares, there's 3 general principles, right? Number 1, proximity to the deceased. Number 2, the generational position of the heirs. And number 3, the social hierarchy in Islam, the social burdens and obligations. When you put these 3 principles in place, then whatever comes out is the best thing and most moral thing. People think it's unjust or unfair. Why? Because they don't understand that Islam has a social hierarchy. Islam has given, for example, the male members of the family the financial burden and obligation to take care of their families, for instance. And there is a social hierarchy. And from that, and that social hierarchy actually emancipates women financially, economically, from that perspective, because any money that they get, they don't have to spend. The obligation is on the hierarchy that we just mentioned, which is the man and the male. And this is a complementarian view on gender and social relations in Islam. We don't have this kind of, vacuous view that it's just, you just happen to be a male, you happen to be a female, and you're just like both the same in every shape or form. And therefore, the rulings have to apply in that way. No, we don't see that. We actually think that's an injustice. It's an injustice because treating 2 different things the same is actually injustice. Yeah. And that's sometimes the notion of equality in the kind of liberal paradigm. And no one's going to say that the male and the female is exactly the same. That would be a ridiculous postulation to make. But nevertheless, so there are 3 principles. Let's repeat: proximity to the deceased, generational position of the heirs, and financial burdens and obligations. For example, proximity, the daughter of the deceased inherits half the estates than her grandmother would, for example, yeah? Also, generational position of the heir. For example, a daughter will inherit more than her grandma. Again, financial burden and obligations. There's a social hierarchy in Islam. It's the financial responsibility of the father to provide for the wife and the wider family, and the wife is entitled to her husband's wealth, and her own personal wealth is her own, and she has complete autonomy from that perspective. So, if a father passes away and there's a son and a daughter, then the daughter's going to get half the inheritance of the son. Why? It's not because there's something wrong with women or they're unequal from that perspective or they got diminished dignity. No, the dignity is the same. It's not that. It's that he has the financial burdens and obligations. Fine, they both have proximity to deceased, and they have the same generational position to the heir, but the other third principle is in place now that changes it slightly, which is the financial burden and obligation. So the son, say the daughter's unmarried, he now has to take care of his sister, food, shelter, clothing, education, one would argue. Her money's hers. So in reality, she's richer than him. Yeah. So you have to see it holistically based on the moral legal principles, based on the social models of Islam. And I want people to consider this. From the fiqh perspective, moral legal reasoning perspective, there exists only 4 scenarios in which a female inherits half of a male. 4. Yeah? 4. And there are at least 11 scenarios, listen to this, 11 scenarios where a female inherits the same share as a male. And there are 16 scenarios, or maybe 17, where a female inherits more than the man. Wow. Why don't they mention this? Why don't they mention this? Because it's ignorance. It's based on a kind of non-negotiable hatred for Islam, or non-negotiable hatred for religion, or non-negotiable pseudo-intellectual assumption of we're right, the liberals and the secular people are right. No. If you study Islam, you will see that there are 4 scenarios in which a female inherits half of what the male gets. There are 11 scenarios which the female inherits the same share as a male, and 16 scenarios where female inherits more than a man. If they're going to be consistent, they should say that they shouldn't be feminists, they should be meninists, right? This is unfair. The man, there's 16 scenarios where female gets more than the man. This is unfair. But they don't know what fairness is because they don't understand these moral legal principles. They don't understand the complementarian, different social and economic models in the Islamic worldview that are connected in a very nuanced and profound way to uplift the individuals and uplift society. No. So this is why it's very important to consider the moral legal principles of Islam. You can't make judgments without understanding the moral legal principles and how they relate in the social, economic, and political context. So you can never say women get less than men, therefore Islam says something wrong about the women. That's totally false because there are 16 scenarios where the female gets more than a man, and it was totally false because if you understood the principles such as proximity to the deceased, generational position of the heirs, and financial burden and obligations, and the social hierarchy and social model, then you would appreciate that this is something very profound. Now, yes, they may say, I disagree with your social model and this complementarian system. Fine, they can say that, but that moves away from the detraction of, hey, you guys hate women. And then now we can start saying, well, it's come from Allah, and Allah exists, and His revelation is true, and whatever comes from truth is true. And we could also show the kind of rational benefits of this complementarian system as well. So from that perspective, this is a crazy, false, incoherent detraction, and it actually shows how robust and amazing the Islamic moral legal principles are.
No, okay, that's great, because probably the second, or probably up there maybe with the most, I guess, asked question then, in terms of point to Islam as something that's unethical, immoral, etc., is then the age of marriage, and in particular they use the example of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha radiallahu anha. And so how do we unpack this now, practically speaking? How do we unpack this?
Yeah, this is the age of marriageability in the Islamic discourse. Now this one, for me, I don't believe we have been so, as a community, have to write about this, and you could solve this in 3 minutes, man, 5 minutes. I'm telling you, because a lot of the detractions and the contentions are based upon liberal and secular assumptions, and we just have to understand that. So the false accusation is this, that Islam facilitates some kind of child abuse because, there was a time where 9-year-olds can get married, right? Now, this is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous assertion. It actually projects their own disgraceful fantasies and immoralities on the Islamic tradition, in my view, right? It does. It's a projection. And it's a projection of the arbitrary legal and moral system. Because in Islam, we have legal and moral maxims, okay, derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. For example, there is no harm, no reciprocating of harm. Certainty is not removed by doubt. Hardship begets facility. Urf, custom, culture has legal weight. It's determinative. Matters are based on the intention behind it. Okay, so these are some of the legal and moral maxims. So when you apply some of these maxims onto, for example, the age of Aisha, say she was 9 years old when they got married, right? Or when they consummated. From a secular liberal paradigm in today's modern context that has the false assumption that biological age is equal to social age, which is a false assumption because traditionally that hasn't been the case, which we're going to unpack. And it's based on this false assumption that it has to be an arbitrary number, yeah, not based on principles or based on an arbitrary number. They're like, this is child abuse. No, this is your projection, my friend. Listen to the Islamic moral legal reasoning. You have to understand the usuli definition of harm, right? And it's categorized in two distinct categories: mind, psychological, right, which is also contingent on urf, sociological factors, and body, right, mind and body. So what Islam says, there is no harming, no reciprocating of harm. There must be physical well-being, mental and psychological well-being. And that is also in consideration of the urf. Because remember, urf as a legal maxim, social custom, is actually determinative with regards to law. Yeah.
Yes.
So when it comes to Aisha or radiallahu anha as a case study, we know that there was no harm and there was no reciprocating of harm. Because we know when she reached a certain level of maturity, her getting married and her consummating the marriage with the Prophet ﷺ was not harmful to her mental and psychological well-being. For example, Aisha radiallahu anha ranks as the most knowledgeable, one of the most knowledgeable of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. She was a prolific narrator of over 2,200 narrations, okay? And Al-Aini, he's a commentator of Sahih al-Bukhari. What does he say? He says a quarter of legalistic judicial rulings present in the Sharia, in Islamic law, is by the way of Aisha. Allahu Akbar. We also know Aisha radiallahu anha was outspoken for her brazenness in voicing her opinions. And based on her own words, and the community's own words, her marriage was based on muhabba, love, dignity, respect, affection. I would even argue forbearance, and I would even argue some good old fun as well, yeah? Because the person used to race with her and so on and so forth. So there was no mental and psychological ill-being. It was well-being, just by virtue of what we're saying. So this is the principle of there is no harming, no reciprocating of harm. Also, there was no physical ill-being. There was physical well-being. This is based again on the principle there is no harming and no reciprocating of harm. And those two things, especially the first one, the mental psychological, is also contingent on the urf. So the urf, the social custom at that time, there was no wrongdoing. The Prophet's enemies didn't say to him, what are you doing marrying this girl? What are you doing marrying her at this stage of her development, maturity? What are you doing marrying her? Even her father, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, said, she is ready, come and take her, basically. Yeah? So the social custom was in place. There was no physical harm, no mental or psychological harm. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Because these are now the principles to assess across time and across social custom if you can get married on. And when you apply these principles maybe today, you have to ask, is there psychological harm? Is there physical harm? Right? And is there social acceptance? The urf is determinative. So based on these moral and legal principles, there is no harming, no reciprocating of harm. In other words, there's no mental and psychological ill-being. There's no mental and psychological harm. There's no physical ill-being. There's no physical harm. There's actual physical well-being. And that is also contingent to the urf, the social custom, because in this context, that legal maxim, the urf, is determinative. It's actually, it dictates and it shapes your moral and legal outcome. Given that's the case, when someone says to you in today's culture, would you allow your 9-year-old daughter to marry a man? I'll say no, it's immoral. And there's nothing, and that's completely Islamically consistent for me to say that. Why? Because the age of marriageability is not dependent on just an arbitrary number. It's based on these legal moral principles. And if you apply them today, and remember, what's determinative here is the urf and social custom. Our social custom is such that a 9-year-old is nowhere near ready to get married. because the biological age is more connected to the social age in our culture, because we're not a traditional culture. And we know that it's going to harm her physically and potentially physically because of the kind of the social environment is different, right? They go to school and so on and so forth. It's not like, I'm 9 years old now, I need to start working in the fields. It doesn't work that way, right? Yeah. They don't have those type of responsibilities, which also shapes your kind of biology and your maturity. So given that's the fact, and it's going to harm her maybe physically and psychologically, then Islamically it will be immoral in my context, living in the UK, to allow a 9-year-old to marry someone older. And this is completely Islamically justified. Now, that doesn't now mean, what happened over 1,000 years ago with the Prophet and Aisha radiallahu anha is immoral. No, because when you apply those legal moral principles, it's completely fine, because there was no physical harm, no mental harm, no psychological harm, and the urf, which is in Islamic legal moral reasoning, is determinative. The urf was completely fine, which is also connected to physical, and it's also connected to psychological and mental well-being. So from that perspective, you apply your principles at that time, it's completely fine. And that's why this whole detraction is so anachronistic. It belongs to a period other than our context today. It's anachronistic. Because remember, social customs change, right? Many societies, including the West, used to allow, women to get married much younger. For example, take the publication Medieval Miscellany by Margaret Wade Labage. And she's a professor of history. She says, it needs to be remembered that many medieval widows were not old. Important heiresses were often married between the ages of 5 and 10 and might find themselves widowed while in their teens. Also, you have Professor Richard Wortley and Professor Stephen Smallbone in the publication Internet Child Pornography Causes, Investigation and Prevention. They say, in medieval and early modern European societies, the age of marriage remained low, with documented cases of brides as young as 7 years, although marriages were typically not consummated until the girl reached puberty. At the start of the 19th century, which is the 1800s in England, it was legal to have sex with a 10-year-old girl. So even the detractors, when they have this detraction, although it's anachronistic because it belongs to another period with a different urf, with a different, social and, even one would argue biological context, we are here today because of those practices. So it's a bit of a self-defeating objection, perhaps, But nevertheless, we also have to unpack the false assumption here. The detractor is coming to us with a false assumption, because there's a false assumption between that biological age is the same as social age. Yes, it may be the case here today in our modern so-called civilization, but traditional societies, it wasn't the same. Biological age wasn't always correlated to social age. Non-Muslim academics even mention this. Sean Halcrow, so the academics Sean Halcrow and Nancy Tales, this is what they state in the journal, the Bioarchaeological Investigation of Childhood and Social Age Prospects. They say, much of the tension in the investigation of age in the past arises from the assumption that we can link biological to social age. Distinctions between the categories, particularly child, adult, are the product of the current limitations of osteological methods for age estimation in adults, and that using biological developmental standards for aging results in the construction of artificial divisions of social and mental development between these categories. Also, in contrast to modern Western society, where social age is closely linked to chronological age, in many traditional societies, stages of maturation are acknowledged in defining age. These stages take into account not only the chronological age, but also the skills, personalities, and capacities of the individual. So, these people, these detractors are just like, they're projecting, in my view, right? And the other thing is, compared to secular law, secular liberal law is arbitrary and, in my view, therefore morally contradictory. Because remember, in Islam, we don't make a massive distinction between law and morals. So take, for example, in New York. In New York, you could get married at 18, but the law permits exceptions to that minimum age, allowing children aged 16 and 17 to marry with parental approval, and 14 and 15-year-olds to marry if they have the permission from a judge in addition to their parents. What about North Carolina? 14. Scotland, 16. It may have changed now, but it was 16. Colombia, marriage is legal age at 18, but boys over 14 and girls over 20 may marry with the consent of their parents. So in one country, you're married legally, and in another country, you're potentially a pedophile. There's no universal age of marriageability, which shows, and this thing, kufr, the rejection of truth, will always contradict itself. Don't get me wrong, there could be abuses in the Islamic tradition, true. But even just from a kind of prima facie, on the face of it, reading of the moral legal principles of Islam and the secular tradition, the Islamic tradition is not arbitrary and contradictory. You could apply it across time and places. And for example, if you apply those principles in certain maybe areas in Australia, maybe some 30-year-olds are not fit to get married because they don't have the mental capacity or the mental well-being or whatever.
Definitely
right?
the case. Definitely the case.
But you see my point. So, when you delve in these matters, obviously, don't get me wrong, the scholars have also cited a number of age, but it's not the only determining factor in certain cases in Islamic law. There's a whole kind of nuanced balance between these things, especially the legal and moral maxims that we spoke about. But the point here I'm trying to say is secular law is arbitrary. And this reminds me of a very powerful conversation that my wife had. Someone asked her a question about the age of Aisha. And do you know how she responded? She said, what age did you want her to be? The guy was stunned. Because that question is a direct, assertive, positive question to say, okay, what's your basis? Talk to me. Any age he was going to bring, as the detractor that he was, I think he was a secular liberal type, he would have contradicted himself in some way from a moral perspective. Therefore, it would remove all of the moral weight of his detraction. Because you could say, fine, if you say 18, what about this place 16? What about this place 14? What about in this context, this, that, and the other? What are you going to say, right? And then it will give you a chance to say, well, it's not just about arbitrary age, it's about these legal maxims. And then it would just really undermine his position. And that's why we should be confident about this. We have no shame. We have full confidence. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ did was pure and beautiful and good for himself and good for humanity and for us to take lessons. And we have to be able to use our aql in the right way to understand the legal moral maxims. And when we do so, we have these timeless principles fit for all times and places, unlike the arbitrary secular liberal law.
Well done.
This just echoes what Muhammad Abu Zahra said in Al-Fiqh Al-Islam. He said something very beautiful.
No.
He says the defining principle within the Sharia, that's brackets within the Sharia, is that any harm is to be warded off as long as it can be avoided, and the safeguarding of man and preventing harm from befalling upon him in any way whatsoever is a firm, established principle in Islam. All of the legalistic, juristic rulings are built upon achieving the benefits of the slaves of Allah, the servants, and every right is stipulated without avoiding any harm. And you only will see harm if you misapply the moral legal maxims. You only see harm if you reduce Islam to a bite size or to a Fox News soundbite or to a misreading or even to just one hadith and ayah. Because on many of these issues, you need many hadith and ayat to come relating to a particular topic and phenomenon and to apply all of the Quran and Sunnah and to bring them together to get the right answer. And unfortunately, these days, we don't have this legal moral reasoning, which is part of the pious predecessors, part of the Sahaba's way of thinking, part of the classical scholars' way of thinking. What we do, we just take one hadith and sometimes we think is enough. It could be in certain cases, but in cases where it's about legal moral reasoning and applied law and applied ethics, it's usually not the case. But people sometimes, they want a tabloid version of religion, and they think you just have Bukhari under one armpit and the Quran under another armpit, and you think you could give legal rulings. This is Jahiliyyah. This is beyond Jahiliyyah. And we have to be very honest about this, that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and the scholars, they apply these legal and moral methodology to derive these timeless principles and rulings. So if you're going to reduce Islam to just one hadith, as one scholar said, when one youth, I think, said to him, oh, there's a hadith. He said, since when was Islam just based on one hadith? And he's not rejecting that hadith, he's taking it and saying, right, what did the Prophet say elsewhere in a similar context? What does the Quran say? What is a general principle that may be specified by this hadith, or vice versa? How do we bring this all together to get the right intent of the legislator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yeah.
And that's very important for us to understand. And when you have that, you're always going to have what Muhammad Abu Zahra said in Al-Fiqh Al-Islami, that the Sharia Islam always avoids harms.
SubhanAllah, inshallah we can avoid harm as well. That's really beautiful, and thank you for those answers, because I think this is something, as we mentioned, a lot of people get asked, and yeah, you're right, people do shy away from this. I think it's very confrontational for a lot of Muslims, particularly when they don't necessarily have the tools or the understanding to be able to answer that. So thank you for that. Hamza, that's all we have time for, unfortunately. There's much more we wanted to go through, but this mashallah was
part 3 in the future, maybe.
We definitely need to. I think we definitely need to. I think there was a lot of great insight here. We talked about a lot of topics, and we were talking at the beginning before the recording, saying that, you know, a lot of these things, this is your first time sort of presenting them on camera, or at least some of them. So we thank you for doing that and allowing us to have that opportunity. And thank you to all the viewers as well. And Hamza, we definitely want to have you on again. So inshallah, we'll be in contact very soon for part 2, part 3, and maybe even a part 4. And again, thank you for your time, and Allah bless your family for being patient with you as well.
I mean, and Jazakallah here for the opportunity. That's the most important thing, because this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'll end with this. I think in chapter 49, verse 17, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, you know, those believers or the Arabs who thought that Iman, accepting Islam, was a favor to the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah says, no, say to them that Iman is a favor to them from Allah. So if Iman is a favor, a gift, an undeserved gift from Allah, imagine calling to Iman. Right. So even you being able to give me this opportunity is a compounded gift that I'm eternally grateful for. May Allah bless every single one of you. Jazakallah khair.
Allah barik fiqh, Allah barik fiqh. Thank you very much, and thank you to all our listeners as well and our watchers. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, hit the notification bell, inshallah, and we'll speak to you or see you all very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
If you enjoyed this video along with all the other content that OnePath Network produces, please support us so we can create more beneficial content for the world. Go to onepathnetwork.com and you can support us from as little as $1 a day. Jazakumullah khair for your support.